Alright, take two. Hello, Mr. Freeland. This is my first time narrating a project. So let's see how this goes. I'm kind of excited. It feels kind of weird. I'm talking to myself. My mom's upstairs. She can hear what I'm saying. So let's give this a shot. I got 21 slides. Let's try and get through this as quick as possible, because I only got 15 minutes. I don't know how this is going to go. But okay, so first page is Final Stats Project. Really sets the thing off, you know. It's good to have a good idea of what you're talking about. So this is my stats project. Alright, here we go. Alright, the topic of the question is racial diversity in AP classes evenly reflected throughout each subject? Those subjects that I tested for are history, English, science, and math. And this question is relevant because at ETHS, we have spent a lot of time trying to shrink the achievement gap and spend time trying to diversify AP classes, but I'm wondering if this diversity is consistent in every AP subject, the 4 subjects that I just listed above, or are some classes more racially diverse than others? This question is interesting because I've always been interested in race and social issues. I'll actually try and major in sociology in college along with political science. I think that's the goal. Alright, so second part of this project is the data collection and how I gathered the data. So basically, to gather the data, I asked my friends to count the number of students in their AP classes and note the racial composition of these classes. It's kind of a convenient sample, but that's what pretty much everyone did when doing these projects. I doubt anyone would randomly use a random number generator and assign each class a number and then do that. So I ended up with data for 5 classes in each subject. So per subject, like for English, I had 5 classes of data. Same with math, science, and history. This data helps to answer the question because with the data I can run different statistical tests to determine whether my claim is true. And that's what I ended up doing, mainly because that's what you have to do on this project. So the 2 statistical tests used are the chi-squared test of homogeneity. Oh well, this is the first test I used is the chi-squared test of homogeneity to answer this question. There's another question which I'll pose later in the PowerPoint, and that's the other question, or the other statistical test. I kind of feel for you doing all your video worksheets because you kind of have to talk around like this, and now that I'm doing it myself, I know I appreciate you much more for it because it's harder than it looks. Alright. I also hope you appreciate the font on my PowerPoint, because in my public speaking class freshman year I learned not to crowd the PowerPoints too much. So yeah, alright, back on topic. So the second test, so the first test was the chi-squared of homogeneity. The second one is the 2-sample t-test, and I'll calculate the mean proportion of whites in AP classes and the mean proportion of blacks in AP classes. So even though I'm using proportions, I'm calculating the mean of those proportions, so I can still use the t-test because it's the mean. And I'll use this test to calculate if there is significant evidence of the disparity between blacks and whites in AP classes. So that's the second question. Pretty much the first question is questioning whether AP diversity is evenly reflected throughout each subject, and the second question, which uses the t-test, is questioning whether there's just a disparity between blacks and whites in general, not necessarily in each subject. Alright, so this is one of the graphs. This is of the data that I'll use for my chi-squared test. The blue line, or the histogram, is it a histogram or a bar graph? I don't even know, because the blue and the red are together, but then it's also separate between English, math, history, science. But so clearly the number of whites and the number of Asians, which are represented by the blue, are clearly higher than the number of blacks and Latinos in the red. But the question is whether these proportions are equal throughout each subject. So the ones for English and math look pretty equal, but in history it looks like it's more diverse, and in the science classes it looks like it's less diverse. But the question is, does this graph do you think that, or do I think that there'll be statistically significant evidence to prove that there's actually like a big difference other than just this occurring by chance? Alright, so like I said, based on the graph in the previous slide, I don't think there is a significant evidence to conclude that racial diversity is not evenly reflected throughout AP subjects, but I'll use the homogeneity test to determine the exact p-value to try and validate that claim that I just made. So here are the results for that. So the chi-squared, I've been saying chi-squared, I think, the whole time, is chi-squared. I apologize for that sincerely. Chi-squared value is 4.612, and the p-value is 0.2024 with the degrees of freedom of 3. So my hypothesis was right. Based on the results we obtained, we do not have significant evidence to conclude that racial diversity is not evenly reflected throughout the AP classes. We still have to assume that it is. Well, we don't have to assume, but like we can't prove otherwise. And the p-value is kind of low. It's 0.2. It's not like it's 0.7 or anything, but it's still like if the alpha was 0.05 or in extreme cases 0.1, it still wouldn't. We wouldn't have enough evidence to reject the null on that. Alright, so this is the second test or whatever. So this is the mean racial proportion per AP class. So this doesn't have to do with like the subject of the class. This is just the straight proportion. So the mean proportion of whites and Asians is about 0.76 in all of the AP classes, the mean of that, and then the proportion of blacks and Latinos is about 0.2, I'd say, so like 0.8 for whites and Asians and 0.2 for blacks and Latinos. And you can say statisticians can do what statisticians do and like question the data and be like, well, that's because the proportion of white people is greater than blacks and Latinos. But in this school, as I noted at the bottom, about half the school is white and Asian, half is black and Latino. So really, you don't have to control for that proportion. So unlike the first graph, I believe that there will be statistically significant evidence to conclude that there is a disparity between whites and Asians and blacks and Latinos in AP classes. Alright, we're like 2/3 done with this thing. Two sample t-test results, so the results from that graph that I posed and the claim that I posed as well. The t-statistic was huge, it was 14. The p-value was like 4.32 times 10 to the negative 6. Hopefully I did that right. And the degrees of freedom was 5.96. It's so exact because it was calculated from the calculator. So to obtain these results, I totaled the number of whites and Asians and blacks and Latinos and entered that into two lists. Then I used the two sample t-test. So I added up all the numbers of whites and Asians in the AP classes, put that into one of the lists, and blacks and Latinos in AP classes, put that in another list, and then used the list to perform the t-test. So the results confirm my hypothesis. Based on our p-value, we have significant evidence to conclude that there is a disparity between the number of whites and Asians and the number of blacks and Latinos in AP classes. This is pretty much well documented. So like a summary or synopsis of both of the tests conclude that racial diversity is evenly reflected among different AP subjects, but that racial diversity is not reflected equally in AP classes in general. So even though proportionally there is around an even number of whites and blacks in each AP subject, there still is a lot more whites than blacks in AP classes in general. So justification for those results. For the first question, when students take AP classes, they usually take a variety of AP subjects. There's no clear bias of one AP subject over another. Although the AP Science classes tend to be whiter, which was shown in the graph above, that still won't affect the p-value too dramatically, meaning it won't sway the p-value to be under 0.05 or whatever. Justification for the results continued. Obviously, there are many reasons for the achievement gaps. This is answering my second question that I posed with the t-tests instead of the chi-squared. So income inequality, lack of educational opportunity outside the classrooms, just the thought of being the only person of color in an AP class. Those are all very valid reasons. So how we can improve and change this, there are already lots of efforts to increase the number of blacks and Latinos in AP classes. You've heard of Team ASAP. Also, I think that the decision to implement mixed-level humanities classes has contributed to the rising numbers of blacks and Latinos in AP classes. That was implemented when I was a freshman, and it turns out that our year is a lot more diverse in terms of AP enrollment, but that could also just be an anomaly or an outlier, if you will, because our class is very, very smart. I think that over time we will see a continual increase of diversity. However, the achievement gap will not be fully solved until factors outside of the high school are improved and controlled for. So our conclusion, well, my conclusion, I did this by myself, unless you want to take credit for teaching me all this stuff. For anyone who might be build upon my research, I would try and acquire data from every AP class in the school, not so the results can yield a true proportion, not just a sample proportion. Obviously, the increased sample size decreases the variability. So if I could do it over, I would have done that. I would have just used more samples and obtained more data. And lastly, what I learned, I originally thought that there was a significant difference regarding racial diversity in different AP subjects, and even though there still was, our p-value was still relatively low, 0.2. It still is not low enough for us to conclude that the results were statistically significant. So yeah, that's my project. I hope you enjoyed this 12-minute and 5-second and counting narration. I bet you feel real awkward just sitting there listening to my voice, but that's that, and hopefully I made you smile, and hopefully I earned your B+, because that's all I need to get an A in the class. Thank you. Bye.